Okay, how are you all this morning? It's good to see a full church. Are you feeling warm? Be honest, yeah? Some of us are feeling warm, some of us less feeling warm. Okay, so Words to the Wise series. We pursue that today. The series kind of sort of started really with Adrian sharing the verse of the year, which obviously is in Proverbs 3. And then Chris sort of officially started it last week with Pathways to Wisdom, beginning to look in detail at the chapter of Proverbs 3. And it's fallen to me to look again at the verse for the year. So thanks for that, Adrian. No pressure. No pressure. But it's good that we get to look at it. Let's read it first off. So Proverbs 3, 5 to 6. Proverbs 3, 5 to 6. Trust the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. I think that's worth reading again. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Words to the wise. It's a really well-known verse, isn't it? How well known is it? I mean, if I was to ask you what verses in the Bible you think are in the top 5, what would you say? John 3:16. Yay! That's number 1 according to World Vision. The number 1 most searched verse on the internet is John 3:16. Another one.
Jeremiah 29:11.
Oh my goodness, have you done this search? Jeremiah 29:11. Yes, for I know the plans I have for you to prosper, etc. Yeah, that's number 2. In terms of the most searched verses on the internet. Another one? Joshua 1:9. Yeah. Not in the top 5.
That's just you and me.
1 Corinthians 13, that's a good one. It's not in the top 5, but it is in there. It is in that list. Okay, number 4 is Proverbs 3, 5 to 6. Okay, so it's the 4th most searched for verse. Number 5 is the Great Commission. I could go on, but it's a very well-known verse. It's kind of more searched for than things like the 23rd commandment, not the 23rd commandment, the 23rd commandment, I'm making them up here, than Psalm 23 or the 10 commandments, that's what I'm trying to say. Number 4 in popularity in terms of people searching for a verse. So it's a very, very well-known verse. There's a danger with popular verses that we can sometimes lose its true meaning because it's so familiar to us that we become desensitized from it. So it's good that it's our verse for the year because it gives us an opportunity to ask God for a fresh revelation. God, what do you really want to say to us through this verse? First off, before I sort of get going, I just really want to share a little picture. When Adrian was sharing the verse for the year, and we sort of saw this picture, and in my mind I was thinking, yeah, make our path straight. And we imagine we're sort of going to and fro. We've got God's will in the center, and we're to and fro, and all we need to do is kind of settle down a bit, and then we'll be in God's will and centered around him. And as I was thinking that, I felt God was saying to me, actually, that's often not how it is. We imagine it's like this, that we just need to make our path straight. But actually, it's much more like this, that when God makes our path straight, he takes us somewhere completely different. That it's not just simply, we're sort of working our way around God's will and then we'll just settle down. It's actually when we start looking to God for his will, for his straight paths, God is saying, look, I'm over here. You thought I was here, but actually I'm over here. Your ways are not my ways, says the Lord. And that was a real challenge to me because I think if we are serious in wanting our paths to be made straight and following God, then he's going to take us probably in a very, very different direction to the one that we thought we were on. And we need to align our hearts to that place. We need to align our hearts to that place. So this title for today is Trust Beyond Understanding. I've given it a subtitle of Straight Paths. Trust Beyond Understanding, or Straight Paths. And what we have here with this, we desperately need a fresh revelation about this, more than ever, really, because today, knowledge is king. Knowledge is all around us. We revere knowledge in a way that we haven't in the past. Scientific facts are taken for granted, even though most people don't really understand them. They'll quote experts, they'll trust experts. But when Proverbs was written, knowledge, understanding, it was more of a mystery. It was something that people sought after, rather than just assuming they knew all the answers. And for us, pathways, whether they're physical or whether they're spiritual, digital, whether they're physical or digital, pathways for us are provided. We drive on motorways, we go down A roads. Okay, there's some potholes here and there, but they're provided for us. But when Proverbs was written, and we have very little to do with that, but when Proverbs was written, a pathway was something that the majority of people had a part in creating. They weren't roads, they were tracks through the wildernesses, tracks through landscape, and ordinary people had a part to play in creating those. You see, today we are too reliant on human knowledge. We take for granted the conclusions of experts, and we are too little aware of the responsibility we have for choosing and forging our own pathways through life. And there's another reason we need a fresh understanding of straight, because the opposite of straight is crooked. And if you do a quick search about what crooked means, you will come up with something really quite disturbing. Crooked, as opposed to straight, is seen as something akin to witchcraft and evil. And so we desperately need to understand what it means to have our path straightened by God. So let's delve in. We have a series of 3 instructions and then a promise in this passage, in these 2 verses here. We have three instructions and 1 promise. And the first instruction is simply to trust God. Instruction 1 is to trust God. Trust the Lord with all your heart. When we delve into that word trust, we can find that it means sort of 3 different things. The first thing it means to believe, simply to believe. John 3:16, it's already been mentioned, whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. In the Bible, trust and believing are interchangeable. In Acts 16:31, and they said, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household. In Romans 10:9, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And Jesus said this to his disciples and to us, do not let your hearts be troubled. This is John 14. You trust in God, trust also in me. Interchangeable, believe in God, believe also in me. And this is something that we perhaps haven't really understood. Trusting means believing. And believing is actually an act of the will. We can choose to believe, and we can pray. When we find believing a struggle, we can pray that God will help us in our unbelief. The next thing that trust means in the Hebrew is to confide in. If you think about it, you think about the people you confide in, it tends to be those that you trust the most, isn't it? You're unlikely to confide in someone who you don't trust to keep that confidence. We only confide in those we trust. In fact, we know who we truly trust when we've got something to confide, when we've got something we want help with and we want to share. Then we find out who we truly trust, because we won't go to just anybody. And God's call in trusting him is to confide in him. How many of us go to God with everything? Psalm 18 says this, in my distress, I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him even to his ears. We're called to cry out to God. In 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. If we're anxious, he is the one to go to. And another Psalm 62, trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Whatever it is that you're going through, to trust God means to confide in him. Whatever the situation, go to God. And the last thing that we understand trust to mean is trust is actually love in action. We show love for God when we become vulnerable and totally trust him. We trust those we love. we love those we trust. Notice how this passage, trust the Lord with all your heart, has echoes of the greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart. 1 Corinthians 13, another one mentioned, it wasn't in the top 5, but it's up the top there. 1 Corinthians 13 tells us that trusting is a characteristic of love. It is part of love. If we love God, we should trust him. Crucially, we show love for God when we trust him. Often we're asking, how do I love God? And there are a few things in the Bible that makes it really, really specific. We get caught up in what this means because love can sometimes be mistaken as a kind of involuntary feeling. But actually the Bible shows us that love is so often a decision of our will. And there's several things in the Bible. One of them is, if you love me, obey my commandments. That's a very practical thing. But here we have, if you love me, trust me. I'll show you a picture here. I once went on a mission to Norway. That's a beautiful place to go on a mission to, isn't it? That's Ålesund, one of the most stunning cities. There's a house there that looks like this, and it's been turned into a museum. And the reason it's there as a museum is there was a fire in 1904. And this was the only house that was left standing, complete, untouched. And there's a story behind it, and we were told when we were being shown around that house that there was a massive fire in Ålesund in 1904. And there was a believer, a God-fearing believer called Anders Nord, and an angel had appeared to him the day before and said, something big's going to happen, just trust in God. Just trust in God, because he will protect you. And this fire started, and he felt compelled that God had given him this word to trust in him, and he sat on his Bible reading Psalm 91. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. And he sat on his bed, and in faith, believing God, he did not flee like everybody else did. He stayed in his house. Now, I often find that actually women have more faith than men. In this case, it was the other way around. His wife wasn't so trusting. She tried to rescue all the furniture, and she was single-handedly grabbing the furniture and putting it out into the street so it would be saved. By the end of the night, all the furniture had been burnt. The house stayed standing. And it stays as a testament today to the faith of Nord and how he had put his faith in God. And it was the only house that was left completely intact. Trust in God. Instruction 2 is to lean on God. Now, it's put in a slightly sort of other way round in this passage. It says, do not lean on your own understanding. Lean not on your own understanding. The converse, the implication is, lean on God instead. And the first thing I want to sort of tackle about this is understanding, the concept of understanding, that we should lean not on our own understanding. It would be wrong for us to think that understanding is a bad thing, because understanding is actually a good thing. Knowledge is a good thing. We'll find that in Proverbs, in the very next chapter, 4, 5 to 9, several verses talking about how important it is to get understanding. In fact, let's sort of flip over to that and I'll read that to you. This is Proverbs 4, so the next chapter along. And it says this: get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: to get wisdom, though it cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. It goes on. Understanding is not a bad thing. We are to pursue it, the Bible tells us. Proverbs 18 and 15 says this: an intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. In Hosea chapter 4, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. So understanding is actually a good thing, and it will be a misinterpretation of this passage to think that, we should just go through life not trying to understand things, not trying to attain knowledge, because that is not what the Bible is teaching, and that's one of the dangers when we have popular verses, that we can misinterpret them and get the wrong end of the stick. So there is nothing intrinsically wrong with knowledge or understanding. However, the Bible teaches us very clearly that that understanding comes from God. And we can seek it. In Proverbs, again, Proverbs 2, the chapter before this, 3-6, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. So we can seek it, and understanding comes from God. So why wouldn't we seek it? We can ask for it. James 1:5 says this, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all, and it will be given to you. And if you're searching, well, how do I search for this? It's very clear. We can find it in his word. Psalm 119, 130 says this, the unfolding of your word gives light. It gives understanding. It gives understanding. So understanding is good. It comes from God. And yet, there is a point where we have to just rely on God. And that's what this verse is telling us. There comes a point when we have to just rely on God. When, despite the understanding we've attained, despite the understanding God has given us because we've asked for it, despite the understanding we've grasped from Scripture and understood, there come circumstances in life where actually, oh my goodness, I really don't understand this. And that is the point where, rather than trying to rely on some cobbled together understanding that doesn't really make sense, that's the point where we say, okay, God, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. Job is a very, very challenging book. Job, God said of Job that he was the most righteous person around at the time. And Job had a lot of understanding, but in chapter 28, he talks eloquently about how nobody has the full understanding other than God. That he didn't really fully understand his circumstances. He understood a lot, but he didn't fully understand his circumstances, and he handed it over to God. And when his friends were trying to make sense of it and telling him this, that, and the other, and getting it wrong, Job was saying, no, I just placed my trust in God. You know, I could tell you many stories of where my understanding has run out, and I've just had to say, God, I rely on your understanding of this situation. When my late wife and I, when we lost our child at term, I didn't understand that. It didn't make sense. But we relied on God's understanding, trusted in God. When that led to her kidney failure, we didn't understand that. But there was a point in that journey where we recognized God had a bigger understanding. When it ultimately led to her death, we didn't understand that either. But she embraced it, understanding. I could go into details of those stories. I won't now. When Sarah and I lost our middle child, we didn't understand that. But we rely on God's understanding of the situation. And bringing it to something really practical here. When I sat where Stephen is now in this church 8 years ago and felt God say to me, you should be coming here. And at the time, there was only one other child in the building. And all my sense, all my understanding said, you need to get your children in a church with a strong youth group so that they can grow up and learn what it is to be around other Christian youth. And I'm thinking, this doesn't make sense. You're calling us here, and there's no youth group. There's one other child. We were aware that there were actually two other children as well, and there were a few more around, but it was really sparse. There was no youth work, and it didn't make sense because, seriously, I had been thinking, I just need to make sure my children are in good, strong youth groups so they can grow up with Christian peers. It did not make sense, and yet we felt we just have to rely on God's understanding. He understands something bigger here than we do. And I say this now to glorify God, not in any way a boast, because I feel I've had nothing to do with this. In submitting to God's understanding, I'm just seeing my children thrive in God. I'm seeing them do things that I could never have imagined. I'm seeing them on the streets doing street evangelism, hooking up with Christians around the country, pursuing things of God, wanting to follow God's footsteps. And I'm thinking, this is all I ever wanted. And I thought the way to do it was plug them into a good youth group in a big church somewhere. And 8 years ago, God said over there, this is where I'm calling you. And it didn't make sense. Relying on God's understanding. Instruction 3 is to submit to God. I feel I have to hurry up now. But to submit to God. Instruction number 3. In all your ways, submit to him. This is from the word yada. Submit comes from the Hebrew word yada. And it means several things. And I believe an understanding of the things that it means helps us understand what it means to submit. And the first thing it means to submit is this: to know God. To know God. That's not just a know as in I know of God, but it's a deep, intimate knowledge of God. I love that story that Steve shared about being in the presence of God and that parallel he drew of becoming more French. If you spend time in God's presence, you become more knowledgeable about God. You begin to become intimate with God. Jeremiah 9 says this: let not the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Not let the rich boast in their riches. But let them who boast in this, that they understand and know me. That should be our ultimate goal, to get to know him. When we looked at the series on Follow Me and disciples, and it was a revelation to me when I realized just how much in the first half of Jesus' ministry, all the disciples did was spend time with Jesus, absorbing what Jesus did. When all other followers of other rabbis were thrown in the deep end to do hard tasks, Jesus' disciples just went to a wedding to begin with. And then they just spent time getting to know Jesus. If we submit to God, just get to know him. Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him in John 8, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So abiding time, spending time in his word is how we get to know. The next thing here is to acknowledge. Acknowledge in all things, acknowledge God. In fact, you'll find some other translations actually use the word acknowledge rather than submit. In all your ways, acknowledge me, and I will direct your paths. But here is another meaning of the word submit, yada. And we can do that in many ways. Before God, we need to acknowledge him. We can do that in worship. In Revelation 4, we see people worshipping, worthy are you, O Lord, O God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. When we worship together corporately, we are acknowledging God. And when in the gaps in between the songs that are written for us, we begin to just open our lips and praise him for who he is and for what he's done in our lives, singing, speaking, just pouring out, we are acknowledging God in front of God for his benefit, for our benefit. Acknowledging in worship is important. Sharing our faith with others, with other believers, is another thing to do. 1 Peter 3 says this, but in your hearts honor Christ and the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. It's important to share our testimonies with each other. Excuse me. Important to share our testimonies with each other, our journey with each other, acknowledging God in that. It's important to do it in front of people who don't yet believe. As in Matthew 10:32 says this, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. And the final way that we can acknowledge is by following. You see, the disciples spent time in Jesus' presence. The disciples would go on to share everything that Jesus has done for them and turn the world on its head by their testimony and through the power of God. But a huge part of what they did was they simply followed. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus came to show us the way, to show us the right path. That's what Jesus came for. And he invited all, any who would follow me, he says. It wasn't restricted. Any who would follow me, I invite you, take up your cross and follow. Jesus' disciples were known as followers of the way. The early believers were known as followers of the way, the path, the straight way. Submitting to God means diverting from our own way to follow his way. In all your ways means let all of your ways be reprogrammed to his ways. I need to move on here. Sorry, that was follow him. So those are the three things that we are called to do, the three instructions, and we then end up with one promise from God. If you do these things, if you trust, if you rely on my understanding, if you submit, if you do these three things, God will make your paths straight. He will make your path straight. You see, there's a danger here when we think about paths and straight and stuff like that. We imagine it's some kind of external thing, that God will lay a train track down for us and we just get onto a carriage and go on a nice, easy ride down this smooth, straight path. But both of these terms, both path and straight, they have metaphorical use in the Bible. One common picture is the idea of a path or a way to represent a person's lifestyle, the direction of a person's life, whether it follows God or wanders off. But this is no modern rail, no modern road that someone's provided for us. Instead, this refers to a well-trodden track in which we follow, and a track which we then contribute to becoming more of that track, if that makes sense. Look at these pictures. These are called desire paths. Have you come across this concept? That's a desire path across Highbury Fields. Nobody has provided a pathway, but someone wanted to get from one corner to another, thought, I'm just going to walk across the grass. And then loads of other people did the same thing, and a pathway has been forged. The council have provided a nice way round that corner. But most people are thinking, well, I just need to go over there, so I'll just go over there. I'm going to go straight to my destination. And then I love this one. It's like, why? No, I'm going for that door. I'm just going to go straight, and everybody else goes straight. And this is the kind of picture of what we're talking about. God will make your path straight. We have to think about paths that are forged by continually going in them. So we see God's path, but the more we walk in God's path, the more we follow his instructions that we've already seen, then the firmer and more direct and more established our pathways become. So just let's consider two things before we finish, paths and what straight paths are. So paths, again, this comes from a sort of Hebrew word. It's very metaphorical, so we can't just understand it as a path that someone has created for us. It's a path that we forge. And one part is defined by the destination or our destiny. Our destiny in God is through Jesus to become reconciled with him. Jeremiah 21:8, say to this people, this is what Yahweh says, behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. Proverbs 16 says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Revelation, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. God's destiny for us is to be reconciled with him eternally through the sacrificial love of Jesus. And he has provided a way before us. And we just have to follow in that way. And if we go anywhere else, it will lead to destruction. So part of paths is having our destiny right, having our destination right, that's focused on the path that God has put before us through Jesus Christ. But also paths refers to our life's choices. It's the way that we live our life. That is what paths represent as well. By following the instructions that we've looked at, we will make the right choices. We will increasingly make the right choices if we do those things. God still doesn't make these choices for us. This is important to hear. It's not, okay, you do that, that, and the other, and I will just then control you like a robot. No. We still, through our free will, make the choices. But if we follow those instructions, the choices we make will lead us in the straight paths that God has for us. And then really, really important, character. Our path represents our character. You see, a crooked character will easily fall into sin. It will be attracted to dishonest solutions. It will be self-centered and lack concern for others. It results in a crooked life and a crooked path. But as we put into practice those instructions, then our character develops so that we revisit the right decisions all the time, that we keep our eye on the destiny God has for us. And we are attracted by the things of God, the honest solutions. We develop concern for others, and our pathways become straight. And then finally, and I'm nearly finished, just to understand what straight means. Straight isn't just simply straight ahead. It also metaphorically refers to, through the Hebrew, metaphorically refers to other things. And straight is actually a verb. It's a doing word. So it doesn't mean, oh, just follow that straight path. It also means we have a part to play in making that path straight. Yes, he makes it by giving us the instructions, by promising that our paths will become straight if we do them, but we have to do those instructions in order for those paths to become straight. Sometimes that means we'll need to break through obstacles. Sometimes it means God will break those obstacles for us. Sometimes following that straight path will be easy because God is clearing things out of our way. Other times, God is saying, right, you've got to deal with this. You've got a choice here. You either go to the side, the easy route, or you push through and make the right choice. It's a doing word. Straight means to do good. It means to not, in your choices, to make sure you are picking the correct choices. And finally, straight means to serve justice, to do the just thing, to look to the benefit of others, the interest of others. Trust beyond understanding, straight paths. This is what we're called to. We're called to just trust God beyond our own understanding. When things don't make sense, just hand it over to God. Put into practice the things that he has told us to do. And he will, through his promise, make our lifestyle straight. He will make our destination clear and straight. He will make our character straight as we do those things. Just going to come to a challenge now before we turn to worship. Let's look at this another way around. Well, first of all, just a summary. If we follow God's instructions, if we trust him with our life, if we lean on his understanding over our own, if we submit everything to him, then God's promising our destiny will be eternally secure. Our choices in life will be good, and our character will increasingly become like Christ. But let's look at this another way so that we can challenge ourselves. Do any of the following concern you? Are you worried about any of the following? Are you worried about your eternal salvation? Are any of you here uncertain about that? Or perhaps you're certain of that, but the general direction of your life is really unclear to you, and you can't see the end from the beginning. Or are you fed up of making bad choices? Are you aware that you're frequently making the wrong choice and it's pushing you off this way or pushing you off that way? Or are you aware of flaws in your character that are not getting better, they're getting worse? That rather than your character improving and becoming more Christ-like, it seems to be going in the opposite direction. If you're concerned about any of those things, then the solution is here in this verse for the year. It is to trust God. It is to lean on him. And it is to submit to him. The band could come up now and lead us in some worship. In a moment, I'm going to hand back to Adrian. But as we begin worship, before Adrian comes up, and we just spend some time in worship, I just want you to reflect on what we've been looking at. I mean, we can all do this more, can't we? We can all trust God more. We can all lean on him more. We can all submit to him more. If the question was, do you need to do any of these things more? My hand is right up. And I think anyone in this place today will have their hand right up. But God might be pointing a finger at one particular aspect of this to you, and now's an opportunity to reach out to God and say, yeah, give me the strength, God. Let me trust you more than I've ever done. Help me, show me how to lean on your understanding in situations that I can't understand. And help me to truly submit everything to you. As we begin to worship, let's just respond to God in whatever way is appropriate.